The silence inside the courtroom was no longer silence. It was pressure. Thick, crushing. The kind that builds before a storm tears the sky apart. And at the center of it all, Sergeant Nathaniel Rhodes stood trembling, his fingers curled white around the edge of the table, his crutches abandoned beside him like discarded armor. He had been ordered to stand. Not requested. Ordered. By a woman in robes who didn't see a soldier, or a man, or a human being, but an inconvenience. Judge Miranda Dalton's voice rang out again, cold and metallic. This courtroom does not tolerate insubordination. Stand up, Mr. Rhodes, or you will be held in further contempt. The words were flint against dry tinder. Nathaniel's eyes closed for a single breath. He wasn't in the courtroom anymore. He was in the desert again. The flash, the roar, the shrapnel screaming through his leg. The moment when silence followed the explosion, because pain that deep doesn't scream, it whispers. It digs into the bones and stays there. He opened his eyes. And then, slowly, painfully, with every nerve in his ruined leg screaming for mercy, he pushed himself up. The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the old wall clock, counting out every unbearable second. He stood, or tried to, his right leg locked, tense and trembling. His left, the one fused together with titanium pins and stubborn willpower, buckled almost immediately. But he didn't fall. Not yet. He wavered like a dying flame, eyes locked on the judge who still sat unmoved, uncaring. For a single, fragile second, he was upright. And then his knee gave out. It didn't fold. It shattered beneath him like glass underfoot. The crack of his body hitting the floor was louder than the judge's gavel had ever been. His head hit tile. His elbow split open on the sharp edge of the bench. A collective gasp shot through the courtroom. But what made people cry out was that he tried to get back up. Blood in his mouth. A cut above his brow. His fingers clawed the tile. His limbs jerked like a man drowning, not in water, but in humiliation. And still, Nathaniel Rhodes fought to rise. Not because he was being watched, not because it was asked of him, but because something inside him, something stitched deep into his soul, refused to surrender. I said stand. Judge Dalton screamed. But her voice didn't matter anymore. The people in the gallery stood, one by one. Old veterans, young women, teenagers, lawyers, mothers. One man in the back whispered, he already did. The bailiff moved first, kneeling beside Nathaniel. Then came his sister, in scrubs, tears streaming down her face. She dropped to her knees and held him like a child. Judge Dalton opened her mouth, but there was no sound left in her. And then, a voice from the gallery. An elderly man with a purple heart pinned to his chest. You want him to stand? The man shouted. Then we stand with him. And they did. The entire courtroom. Every last person. Standing. For the soldier on the floor. The thunder of silence was replaced by a storm of stillness. A stand of unity so loud it drowned out authority. Judge Miranda Dalton, once towering in her judicial seat, now looked like a relic of a world that had forgotten how to feel. Her hand hovered over the gavel, but she didn't strike it. Because she knew. She had lost the room. She had lost the people. And she had lost the right to judge the man still gasping for air on her courtroom floor. Nathaniel Rhodes, bloody, broken, but still clinging to his dignity, looked up, not at the judge, not at his sister, who was now cradling his head in her lap, but at the people standing tall in his place. For the first time in a long time, his eyes filled with tears that weren't from pain. The courtroom doors burst open once more. A uniformed officer stepped through, not a bailiff, not a sheriff, but a woman with stars on her shoulders. General Marissa Holloway. Decorated, feared, respected. She didn't pause to ask permission. She didn't stop to ask for introductions. She simply walked straight down the center aisle like a verdict in motion. Sergeant Rhodes, she said, kneeling beside him. Her voice was gentle, but unshakable. You don't rise alone. Not today. Not ever again. She turned her gaze on Judge Dalton. Cold. Direct. I've already spoken to the governor. You will receive a formal review for your actions today, Judge. But let me say this clearly now, while you still wear that robe, what you did here will be remembered. Dalton opened her mouth, but no defense came, because there wasn't one. General Holloway nodded to the bailiff. Get this man a stretcher, and someone call a medic. That's an order. As the paramedics arrived, wheeling Nathaniel gently from the room, the applause didn't roar. It didn't explode. It rose, like a tide, deep, steady, unwavering. The sound of a nation remembering its soul. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had formed. Veterans in full dress uniform. Civilians waving flags. Handmade signs held high. We stand with Rhodes. Honor before law. A soldier's dignity is America's duty. News crews shoved microphones forward. Reporters shouted questions. Nathaniel, lying on the stretcher, blinked into the sky. The pain in his leg was unbearable, but he bore it, because that's what he had always done. He lifted one hand weakly and formed a salute. The crowd erupted. A sea of salutes answered him. And then, quietly, he passed out from exhaustion. He awoke in a hospital bed. Clean white sheets. Machines blinking. His sister asleep beside him in the visitor's chair, her hand wrapped around his. At the foot of the bed, a stack of letters had already begun to pile. Some from strangers. Some from senators. One, embossed with the seal of the White House. He didn't open them yet. He didn't need to, because something had shifted inside him. A clarity he hadn't known he was missing. A knowing that this moment was bigger than him. 3 days later, still in a wheelchair, still bandaged and stiff with pain, he rolled into the largest auditorium in the city. Not to sit, not to watch, but to speak. Before him sat thousands. Veterans, students, judges, mayors, mothers, teachers. He rolled to the center stage and locked the brakes on his chair. A spotlight warmed his face. And when the microphone picked up his voice, gravelly, raw, and utterly real, the room fell into perfect silence. I stood that day, he said, because I thought I had to prove I still mattered. He looked down, breathing deeply. But I was wrong. He raised his head. I didn't have to prove I mattered. We had to remember they all do. He gestured to the veterans seated in the front row, some missing legs, some faces, some just lost. They tell us to heal quietly, to disappear after our service, to fade into a system of paperwork and wait lists. But we don't disappear. We carry it. Every hour. Every breath. He paused. The air was heavy with unspoken truth. And yet, when I fell, you stood. Not because I was special, but because you knew what it meant to fall. You knew what it means to rise together. He held up the crumpled speech he'd written in the hospital, then let it fall to the floor. I don't need a script, because my body already tells the story. A soft laugh rippled through the room. Relief and resonance mixed as one. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to remind you. He leaned in close to the mic. Every wounded veteran you pass by on the street, every scarred soul in silence, every soldier who still wakes screaming in the night. We are not broken. We are unfinished. And you, America, you owe it to them to finish this story right. The crowd rose to their feet again. Tears, applause, hands over hearts. Because this wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. Over the next 6 months, Nathaniel Rhodes's name would become synonymous with reform. Courthouses across the country would change protocol. Veterans would receive new protections in public institutions. Federal legislation, named the Rhodes Act, would be passed with bipartisan support. And everywhere he went, Nathaniel rolled into schools, town halls, parades, not as a hero, but as a reminder of strength, of pain, of the simple truth that dignity does not depend on posture, it depends on presence. One cold December morning, he was invited back to the courtroom where it all began. But now, the judge's seat was empty. Judge Dalton had resigned. Quietly, voluntarily. And in her place, a new judge presided. A woman who had once stood in the back row that day, her own father lost to war, her own belief in justice reignited by a broken man who refused to be bowed. Nathaniel looked up. The courtroom was still gray, still cold. But on the wall behind the judge's bench now hung a bronze plaque. To the one who stood while falling. To the one who reminded us all what justice is for. His sister stood beside him, arm around his shoulders. You ready to go? She whispered. He smiled, tired but whole. Yeah, he said. But let's go the long way home. I want to see the statue one more time. They wheeled him out past the sculpture. Bronze, kneeling, fists on the ground, crutches crossed like swords. And as the sun rose over the courthouse, Nathaniel Rhodes saluted it. Not as a symbol of his victory, but of everyone's.